What better way to get back into making videos about politics other than taking a test about where I land on the political spectrum? It's been a while since I've taken one of these tests, and honestly, a lot of the tests are stupid. The questions that are written in such a way that's more of a reflection about the person who wrote the test. So I can't really put too much stock into what it really says about my political leanings, other than giving me a general idea about where I would be if someone were to ask me point blank, are you a conservative? Are you liberal? Are you libertarian? Are you a fucking idiot? And I'd probably be the latter. This is on pewresearch.org. I'll try and remember to put this in the description if you guys want to take this test yourself. Okay, so we have 16 questions to go through. If you had to choose, would you rather have a smaller government providing fewer services, a bigger government providing more services? The old me back in the day would probably say a smaller government because government sucks at everything. Me now, I would say, I see the problem is that government sucks, and if we can fix the government and utilize a bigger government to take care of people properly, I'm in favor of a bigger government provided that the government operates correctly. How we get to that point, I'm not entirely sure. A smaller government is less infringing on people's day-to-day lives. The offhand, a lot of people fall through the cracks because we don't have the proper social safety nets to help those people out. When you say you favor a bigger government providing more services, do you think it would be better to modestly expand on current government services, greatly expand on current government services? I'm not entirely sure I know all the government services that are out there. I don't know. This is really more of a question of like, what are you comfortable spending your tax money on? If we can greatly expand it for the betterment of our whole civilization, let's greatly expand it if we can find a way to properly afford to do so. Which of the following statements come closest to your view? America's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a nation. If America is too open to people from all over the world, we risk losing our identity as a nation. I think our openness is a strength because it brings people from all over the world that culminate here in this one place where we can all work together to create something unique. In general, would you say experts who study a subject for many years are usually better at making good policy decisions about that subject than other people, usually worse at making good policy decisions about that subject? Experts who study a subject for many years are usually worse at making good policy? Neither better nor worse at making good policy decisions about that subject. I mean, better if they're well studied and well versed. It's not the same as like saying, I would trust a doctor who studied all through college to get his degree about what he has to say about the medical field. I wouldn't necessarily trust a doctor of what he has to say about foreign policy. So if it's in that particular realm, I would trust the expert who studied that subject. Thinking about increased trade of goods and services between the United States and other nations in recent decades, would you say that the United States has gained more than it has lost, but because increased trade has helped lower prices and increase the competitiveness of some U.S. businesses? Or lost more than it has gained because increased trade has cost jobs in manufacturing and other industries and lowered wages for some U.S. workers? A little bit of both, I think, honestly. I feel like if we're being honest here, we have outsourced some of that labor to foreign countries, China being one of the biggest manufacturers of a lot of our products. But also, on the downside of that, it's cheaper whenever it comes from China. It's more expensive to make it here at home. I don't know. If I'm just going off my gut instinct, not necessarily well versed in the realm of trade internationally, then I'm going to say that it's lost more than it has gained because increased trade has cost jobs here in the United States. I think the solution to that kind of stuff is all internal. I think trade through other countries is very important, and I think our country in and of itself, if it's costing jobs, need to reinvigorate the job market or have a different understanding about what it means to even work. Spoiler alert, while I'm in favor of UBI, Universal Basic Income, I think UBI coincides with our need as human beings to be fulfilled in life. I don't think our job is the end all be all. Right now it is in a capitalist society, because if you don't work, you literally just fucking die. But not only that, it's more so that you work a job that doesn't pay you enough to have the essentials to live a comfortable life. The average American is just barely scraping by, working their ass off. With the way inflation is going, I mean, there is inflation, but a lot of it is corporate greed that's taken advantage of using the term inflation. But the way that's going, a lot of more people are going to be struggling. I think the path of UBI inevitably leads you to the conclusion that we should change the structure of the way we see labor, the way that we see ourselves as useful, even whenever we're not spending 60 hours a week at a job just to buy essentials. And that's it. That's the bare minimum. You don't have a life outside of that. Essentially, your life amounts to the amount of work you're outputting. Then what happens whenever you lose your job? You're essentially useless. No wonder people are suicidal whenever money is the end-all be-all for the average American. How much more, if anything, needs to be done to ensure equal rights for all Americans, regardless of their racial or ethnic backgrounds? Trying to recontextualize this question to make it make sense. How much more, if anything, needs to be done? I don't know. I'm saying a lot. Which comes closer to your view about what needs to be done to ensure equal rights for all Americans, regardless of their racial or ethnic background, even if neither is exactly right? Most U.S. laws and major institutions need to be completely rebuilt because they are fundamentally biased against some racial and ethnic backgrounds. While there are many inequities in United States law and institutions, necessary change can be made by working within the current systems. A little bit of both is at play here. I will say that while there are many inequities in United States law and institutions, necessary change can be made by working within the current systems. I'm going to assume that also includes changing some of those systems themselves. Which of the following statements come closest to your view? Business corporations make too much profit. Most corporations make a fair and reasonable amount of profit. I think business corporations make too much profit is kind of a blanket statement. The majority of that is going to be, and again, I hate making blanket statements. I think the majority of those corporations are going to be selfish, looking out for themselves, because profit is king, and that usually comes at the detriment to your labor force. Like, my past political self seems weird answering it like this, because part of me doesn't believe that we should be restricting the way businesses make their money per se, because what's the insinuation here? If corporations make too much profit, government's going to have to find restrictions. I guess that's what it is. Like, corporations can be making too much profit. How do we go about addressing that concern? I would go about it by ensuring the labor force is properly taken care of. If the corporation has to take a haircut from their profits to better take care of their workers, then I think that's a fair trade. I mean, that's what corporations do. They have endless amounts of unfathomable amount of money with a whole board of lawyers whose whole sole purpose is to get them the best tax cuts and work within the current system we have to find those loopholes. So I think the fair trade is to, one, ensure that those loopholes don't exist so that we have adequate taxation to fund social programs, as well as take care of that labor force that keep that corporation afloat. How much, if at all, would it bother you to regularly hear people speak a language other than English in public places in your community? Not at all. I sometimes dream about going to different countries. If I'm going to go to a different country, obviously I'd like to understand the language to a certain degree, but I would hope that I'm not expected to always speak that language, especially if it's someone I'm talking to that knows English. So I wouldn't imagine the same be demanded of other people. I would at least hope, bare minimum, people come in here start to learn English just for their own sake, so that they can integrate and ask for help, talk to people. Most people here don't even know more than one language, but I wouldn't expect them to exclusively speak English. On a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 means you feel as cold and negative as possible, and 100 means you feel as warm and positive as possible, how do you feel towards Democrats? I think Democrats and Republicans both suck. Where do I land on each of them? I think Democrats are cowards, and I think Republicans are idiotic, religious zealots. I think Democrats have their party's interest at heart, but fail to act on it. They pass the buck, essentially. So Democrats, I'd say, is about a 50, and Republicans, I'd say, is about a 20. Democrats, there's a lot more that they could be doing to make a real change, but they're too much of pussies to do anything about real change. Which of these statements best describes your opinion about the United States? The United States stands above all other countries in the world. The United States is one of the greatest countries in the world, along with some others. There are other countries that are better than the United States. For me, I think there are other countries that are better than the United States. They're better in certain departments, which is important to me. For me, I think the important thing, especially after my wife just had a kid. That doesn't make the United States one of the greatest countries in the world, is the fact that we're one of the only countries that do not require a paid maternity leave. That became apparent whenever my wife did go on paid maternity leave, which then got netted down to about 40% of her paycheck or something, 40 to 60% of her paycheck, I forgot, probably even less than that. And then we felt the real sting financially trying to raise a child, especially them starting daycare, and then her going back before she was essentially fully healed. She managed to go back to work just fine, but if she were to have it her way and could stay home, I'm sure that would have been the no-brainer thing for her to do. A lot of people aren't in that privileged position to where that's a choice they can make. A lot of people have to go back to work a lot sooner than what their maternity leave allows for. Parental leave, I had a week off. Fantastic. I got to help my wife out for a week and try and let her catch up on sleep. And then the week following after giving birth, she was right back to being by herself while I went back to work. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that the nation can do to better help people, especially let's give the Republican Party what they want. They want people to essentially have children. The Republican Party is essentially anti-abortion. They want you to have kids, but whenever you have kids, you're essentially fucked because the system itself doesn't necessarily take care of those people. Society wants you to have and start a family. When you get started on having that family, you're essentially shit out of luck. There's not a lot of opportunity there for support. Healthcare is another one. Healthcare could be way better for the average American. I think tuition should be way more affordable than what it is now, if not have a free option for American people to go to college. I think a society that is well educated is a better society, and the fact that we have such a fucking barrier to entry is so high, and even if you manage to go through college, you're stuck with crippling amounts of debt. Just fingers crossed you even land a job that's going to pay you that much to have that paid off in a timely manner. I think is just a few examples about why this country is a little behind some of these other countries. How much of a problem, if any, would you say each of the following are in the country today? People being too easily offended by things others say. I think people are too easily offended on both sides. I don't think it's not a problem. I think there's people that are just offended by every little fucking thing, and it's hard to have a conversation, a meaningful, deep, intellectual conversation with people without feeling like you're having to walk on eggshells or you make a mistake and suddenly you're fucking canceled. And then I think there's people that say very offensive things, which leads to violence. Like apparently gay people shouldn't be allowed to exist because the Bible says that's a no-no or some fucking bullshit. So I think that kind of rhetoric leads to violence. I think that's a major problem as well. Which comes closer to your view of candidates for political office, if neither is exactly right? I usually feel like there is at least one candidate who shares most of my views. None of the candidates represent my views well. That's the beauty of a two-party system, folks. We either get shithead A or shithead B, and they both equally suck to some degree, and neither one of them are going to make a real change. People vote for their party affiliation rather than their societal interest. In general, how do white people benefit from advantages in society that black people do not have? I don't have the experience of a black person, so I need to listen to black voices, and that informs me about their experience versus my own personal experience. And even then, my own personal experience is different from other white people, so I have to try and figure from across the board a generalization. How is that? What does that look like? I think it's definitely something that needs to be talked about, looked at, and some real change needs to happen. I think whenever it comes to applying for employment just to get on your fucking feet, there's a lot of obstacles there to be had just from racism in society itself, systemic racism, especially whenever it comes to moving on up into the world, trying to get a fucking basic loan just to even get started, whether it be for a beat up fucking car just to get to that job that you may or may not have gotten accepted at or denied because of your race. I think a lot of those communities are underfunded. I think a lot of those communities are over-policed. I think a lot of those communities are harassed by legislation that essentially excuses the behavior from people in power. So yeah, I think there's a fair amount of advantages that white people have that go right over their head. They take it for granted, that a lot of black people live very consciously aware of that kind of stuff. Do you think greater social acceptance of people who are transgender, people who identify as a gender that is different from their sex they were assigned at birth, is good for society? Somewhat good for society, neither good nor bad. Somewhat bad, very bad for society. Do you think greater social acceptance of people who are transgender, I think, is good for society? I used to be back and forth on this, and I still am kind of not 100% competent on the subject whenever it comes to what transgenderism is itself. I haven't seen a lot of the research. The only thing I need to know is how someone feels, and that's good enough for me. And if nobody believed me or denied my reality, denied my existence, that would lead me into a spiraling depression, feeling like I was some outcast of society. To essentially have a society as a whole say that it's bad for us to integrate these people in with us. You know, they're not a part of us. Let's keep them away, or just pretend like they don't even exist, or worse, put them in some mental institution. I think all empirical evidence would show that that is counterintuitive to any sort of solution whenever it comes to depression, especially in teens who are transgender. Overall, would you say people who are convicted of crimes in this country serve too much time in prison, too little time in prison, about the right amount of time in prison? It's hard to answer this one because there are instances where people do spend too much time in prison for, I guess a better thing is, like, there are too many people that are going to prison for petty crimes. In my opinion, petty crimes. I think there are too many people, like, marijuana should be legalized. Too many people go to prison for a forgettable amount of marijuana in their possession. It's a mixed bag. I don't have the full scope. I would need to do more research. I mean, in my community, I've seen instances where people go to prison for too little time. I mean, for example, apparently you can murder somebody, go to prison for about 15 years, get out, and then you can go record a minor taking a shower, and then you get arrested again. Someone who's in jail for murder, depending on the circumstance, I think needs to be there for a very long time, because I think that's more than likely indicative of their behavior. On the other hand, I think there are people who are wrongfully accused who go to prison for way too long. I'm going to say about the right amount of time for now, because I think there are too many people in prison, but I'm just going to say that as far as like how long people serve, I'm going to say it's the right amount of time. Which of the following statements come closest to your view? Religion should be kept separate from government policies. That's a no-brainer for me. I think the old me would say that religion should play a part in the way government rolls out policy. And I think that is just a slippery slope that leads to religious tyranny. I think government is there for the interest of its people, and then its people can have its own religious convictions. And let's just use Christianity, for example. You have Christians who feel oppressed by the law because the law does not reflect their Christian morals and values, or their convictions, morals, whatever that it looks like in the law. On the opposite side of that, if the law perfectly reflects your perception of what the Bible says, because there's so many denominations, what denomination do we pick to put into the law? Then the people being persecuted are the non-religious. But that's okay in the realm of Christian thinkers, because those people should be persecuted against. They need to turn to God. So the argument for the average American Christian evangelical, there's almost no room for any middle ground there. I say that as a Christian myself, the two should be separate. I don't think Jesus ever wanted anybody to go vote with their religious convictions per se. That way that the law reflects your own personal religious convictions, and then by proxy, everyone else is seemingly forced to live by your perception of Christianity. And then you feel like, I've done my job, I've witnessed, and I've saved so many souls, they're all going to heaven because they're essentially forced to live by these religious values. In the future, do you think United States policy should try and keep it so America is the only military superpower? It would be acceptable if another country became as militarily powerful as the United States. I think our military is overfunded. I think a lot of those funds could be allocated elsewhere to really benefit a lot of other facets of our society. History, the way it's been taught to us, has integrated in my brain to feel afraid that someone else's military power will be as powerful as the United States. I think some of that might already be the case, just in sheer numbers. If it's Russia or China, I mean, you could say that United States still comes out on top for those things, which is all fine and well. But for the rest of the world, that same fear that you have about United States not being not being in power and somebody else being a greater military power than you is exactly probably the fear that the rest of the world has whenever they see the United States. I know that we always like to see ourselves as the peacekeepers and the ones who will come to the rescue. But I think as I've gotten older and I've realized that there's more perspectives out there than just my own from the inside looking out. I think from the outside looking in, it's quite clear to see that the United States hasn't always been a positive, wholesome military force, and it's been quite ruthless and brutal, and it's come at the expense of innocent civilian lives. The fair trade-off would be if we scaled back some of our military funding and allocated it out to take better care of our society while still having somewhat strong of a military force. I'm not saying lay over and just have no force at all, but I am saying that it would probably be a lot wiser to scale it back so we can better take care of our people. What's the point of defending people of a nation whose nation really clearly doesn't give a shit about them currently?
Bruh.
What? Your best fit is stressed sideliners, along with 15% of the public. Stressed sideliners hold a mix of conservative and liberal views and are the least politically engaged typology group. Generally disconnected from politics in the two major parties, they vote at lower rates than most other typology groups. About 4 in 10 live in lower income households, and they are the group most likely to describe their personal finance situation as only fair or poor. Stressed sideliners are split evenly between the Republican Party and Democratic Party, while 1 in 10 don't lean towards either party. They lean liberal on economic issues and tilt conservative on some social issues. That sounds interesting. I've never heard of stressed sideliners. I don't know if that's a new term that's been, because before I felt I was conservative, and then I became more libertarian, and then from there I feel like I've waned more into a liberal view on politics, and then now I feel a little fed up with just about everything. That's why I guess I feel so apathetic towards politics. I don't agree with the whole system. The whole two-party system brings about people that don't reflect any of the average American people's interest. Disconnected from politics, financially stressed, mixed views on issues. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there are cultural issues that get overblown. I think there are cultural issues that need to be talked about more. And I think a lot of those cultural issues I've changed my perspective on. Oh, okay, this is interesting. So people who identified as the stressed sideliner, 39% approve of the way Biden has handled his presidency and 58% disapprove. So in my group, more people disapprove of Biden, and I essentially do as well. I feel like I've discovered something about myself. I already kind of knew that I was a bit more, I've gotten more apathetic towards politics, but now it's interesting to know that there's a terminology that I can refer to now. So, all right, thanks for watching this video. See you next time.